The warden's eyes were like chips of blue ice, polished and utterly devoid of emotion. He didn't blink, not once. He just stared at me from across a vast expanse of polished oak, a desk probably worth more than the cherry-red convertible I'd boosted to get myself sent here. His name was Warden Thorne, and his reputation was as cold and unyielding as the concrete walls that held 2,000 men captive in a state of suspended animation. The air in his office was still and artificially chilled, a sterile world away from the humid metallic press of bodies, sweat, and despair on the blocks. Here, the only sounds were the low, almost imperceptible hum of an industrial-grade air conditioner and the rhythmic tap, tap, tap of his gold-plated pen on a closed file. My file. It was thick enough to stop a door. "I've heard the stories, inmate," he said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my sternum, a carefully controlled instrument of intimidation honed over decades of breaking men. "The yard is overflowing with stories. My officers are practically bursting with stories. The infirmary log is a veritable novel of stories. But stories are like contraband. They change hands, they get twisted in the telling, and they're almost always riddled with lies. I, on the other hand, am in the business of facts. Cold, hard, verifiable facts." He leaned forward, the expensive black leather of his high-backed chair groaning in protest, a sound like a tired beast. The movement brought his face closer, and I could see the fine web of lines around his eyes. He wasn't just a suit, he was a veteran of this war. "So, I want the unvarnished truth. From you. No games, no convenient omissions, no self-serving narratives. I want you to tell me, in excruciating detail, exactly why a good officer, a man with a spotless 8-year record, is on administrative leave, his career hanging by a thread. I want to know why Officer Miller's life is now on the line because of something that started with you. Tell me, inmate," he paused, letting the silence stretch until it was a physical weight in the room, "tell me everything." My throat felt like sandpaper. A summons to the warden's sterile office was like being called before a king for judgment. It meant you were either about to be granted a great and unlikely favor, or, more likely, you were about to be crushed under the full, inexorable weight of the entire institution. My eyes drifted past his impassive face to the large, reinforced window that overlooked the main yard. From this height, the men looked like ants, scurrying along their predetermined paths, completely oblivious that their world, their fates, were being debated and decided in this quiet, refrigerated room. To understand how I, Leo, the library ghost, ended up as the pivot point for all this chaos, you have to go back 2 weeks. Back to when I was just another phantom, trying to float through my 5-year bid without making a single ripple in the murky water. My world was a gray, predictable loop, a monotonous rhythm of bells, shouts, and clanging steel. Wake up at 5:30 to the violent clang of a cell door unlocking. Stand for count, a shivering lineup of men who looked as though they'd forgotten what true sleep felt like. Choke down a breakfast that consistently tasted like despair and lukewarm cardboard, then head to my post. My salvation in this place wasn't God or a desperate hope for parole, it was the library. A dusty, forgotten room at the far end of A block, smelling of old paper, binding glue, and institutional neglect. I was the library clerk. It wasn't a glorious job, not one that earned you respect or fear, but it was quiet. It was mine. I organized the tattered paperbacks, their covers softened and worn by the hands of 100 desperate men seeking a few hours of escape. I painstakingly glued their broken spines, giving them a little more life, a little more dignity. I kept the sign-out sheets, a meticulous record of literary voyages. It was my small corner of order in a universe built on chaos. My goal was simple, a mantra I repeated to myself every single morning as I splashed cold water on my face. Do my time, keep my head down, don't be seen, and get back to a life where I wasn't told when to eat, sleep, and breathe. And prison, you learn to read the currents faster than any sailor caught in a storm. You learn the invisible lines in the chow hall, which tables to avoid, which gazes to never meet. You learn which gangs run the commissary, the phones, the very air you breathe. You learn which guards are looking for a reason to make your life a living hell and which ones just want to finish their 12-hour shift without paperwork. I was a master of avoidance. I made myself small, forgettable. I was polite to the COs, using sir and ma'am without a hint of sarcasm. I kept to myself, trading my commissary snacks, bags of chips and processed cakes, for extra reading time after lockdown. I was a ghost, and that's how I liked it. Ghosts don't get noticed. Ghosts don't get hurt. The man who cast the longest shadow at Northwood Correctional was an inmate named Cyrus. He wasn't the biggest or the loudest. In fact, his power lay in his unnerving quietness. He carried an aura of absolute control, a stillness that was more menacing than any shouted threat. He was a real shot-caller, a king in this concrete kingdom. His crew, a tight-knit group of loyal and brutal men, ran the gambling, the protection rackets, the flow of contraband, pretty much every illicit deal that went down within these walls. Cyrus could be dangerously charismatic, armed with a politician's easy smile and eyes that could freeze your soul in a single, assessing glance. He moved like a shark, all silent, predatory grace. He never had to raise his voice. A quiet word whispered in the yard or a pointed look across the chow hall was all it took. Debts got paid on time, and people who crossed him tended to have accidents. I'd seen it myself. A new fish, a kid barely 20 years old, full of misplaced bravado, refused to give up his dessert to one of Cyrus's men. It was a stupid, trivial thing, a slice of processed yellow cake with waxy frosting. The next day, the kid was found in the showers, his arm broken in 3 places and his face rearranged so badly his own mother wouldn't have recognized him. No one saw a thing. No one said a thing. That was the law of Cyrus. My strategy was simple and absolute. Stay off his radar completely. I was a bottom feeder, happy in the mud at the bottom of the tank. He was the apex predator circling in the clear water above. Our paths were never, ever supposed to cross. But in prison, even ghosts can be seen if someone decides to look hard enough. My quiet life started to unravel on a Tuesday. It started, as most problems do in here, with something small, a stone dropped into the placid water of my existence. Cyrus and 2 of his top lieutenants, Rocco and Jax, walked into the library. This was more than unusual. It was an omen, a black cloud on the horizon. The library was my sanctuary precisely because men like Cyrus had no use for it. To them, books were a weakness, a pointless diversion from the real games of power and survival. Cyrus walked straight to my desk, moving with that unnerving calm. Rocco, a slab of muscle with a neck as thick as my thigh and a perpetually bored expression, swaggered over to a table where an old lifer named Pops was reading a newspaper. Without a word, Rocco snatched it from the old man's hands, crumpled it into a tight ball, and tossed it on the floor. Pops, a man who'd been inside for 30 years and had seen empires rise and fall, just lowered his head and said nothing, his wrinkled hands trembling slightly. Jax, younger and wiry with shifty eyes, leaned against a bookshelf, his gaze scanning the handful of other inmates, silently marking them, cataloging them, intimidating them into leaving. Cyrus smiled at me. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was a smile of ownership, of appraisal. "You run a quiet operation here, Leo," he said, his voice as smooth as silk. He picked up a book from my desk, a history of the Roman Empire, and flipped through its pages with theatrical disinterest. Lots of words. All these dead guys, still talking. "It passes the time," I said, focusing every ounce of my will on keeping my voice neutral, betraying none of the frantic, panicked energy that was suddenly coursing through me. "Time," he mused, dropping the heavy book with a thud that echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "The one thing we've all got too much of. Or not enough." He leaned in, his cologne, a cheap but strong musk, invading my personal space. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "I hear you're good with words. A smart guy. I like smart guys. Sometimes they're useful." This was it. The moment I had expertly avoided for 3 long years. It was a test, a recruitment pitch, and a threat, all rolled into one elegantly delivered package. Joining Cyrus's orbit meant protection, better food, access to things I couldn't get. It also meant being his property. It meant his problems became my problems. It meant doing his bidding, whether it was passing a note, hiding a shiv among the encyclopedias, or falsifying a library record to give someone an alibi. My quiet life, my status as a ghost, would be over, burned away in an instant. "I just keep the books straight, Cyrus," I replied, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. "That's all I'm good for." He held my gaze, his smile tightening at the edges, a flicker of annoyance in his dark eyes. He was searching for any sign of weakness, of fear. I gave him nothing. Finally, he straightened up. "A man should know his limitations," he said, and the way he said it made it a profound insult. "Keep your books straight, Leo. Just make sure they don't get in the way of more important business." He turned and walked out, his crew falling into formation behind him. I watched them go, my hands trembling so hard I had to grip the edge of the desk to still them. A line had been crossed. He had entered my world, my one sanctuary, and tainted it with his presence. I was no longer a ghost. I was on his radar. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, this was just the beginning, and the days that followed, the pressure was constant, a slow, methodical tightening of a vice. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, each one too small and petty to report, but collectively designed to break my spirit. Cyrus's crew would wander into the library, not to read, but just to stand there, watching, their presence a looming threat that disrupted the quiet that was the library's only real asset. They'd pull books off the shelves at random and drop them on the floor with a clatter. They would sit at tables and stare down the other inmates, old men and non-violent offenders who used the library as their own escape, until, one by one, they would get up and leave, defeated. Each act was so small that reporting it would make me look like a snitch and a child. It was a calculated campaign of psychological warfare, designed to remind me that my little kingdom only existed because Cyrus allowed it to. Pops, the old lifer, saw it all from behind his thick, smudged glasses. One afternoon, after Rocco had accidentally knocked over a whole cart of books I just painstakingly sorted by author, Pops shuffled over to my desk, pretending to look for a magazine. "That shark's testing the water," he rasped, his voice dry like old leaves. "He's circling you. Wants to see if you'll bleed." "I'm no threat to him," I whispered, reshelving a copy of a tattered Western, my hands feeling clumsy. "Doesn't matter," Pop said, his weary eyes full of a lifetime of prison wisdom I didn't want. "In here, if you ain't with him, you're a loose end. He don't like loose ends. You represent a pocket of order he doesn't control. A man like that, he can't stand that." It was during this slow-burn siege that Officer Miller started to notice. Miller was different. Most COs were either jaded old-timers who saw us as animals in a cage or young power-trippers high on their first taste of authority. Miller was young, maybe 25, but he possessed a calm and professional demeanor that was incredibly rare. He treated us with a baseline of human respect that, in a place like Northwood, felt like a radical act. He didn't come looking for trouble. He just did his job with an unnerving even-handedness. He was often assigned to our block and would sometimes stand in the library doorway for a few minutes on his rounds, just observing. His presence was a silent question. He saw Cyrus's crew loitering. He saw them trying to intimidate people. One day, Jax was blocking the entrance, physically preventing a younger inmate from coming in to return a book. Miller's voice, calm but firm, cut through the tense atmosphere. "Jax, you're blocking a thoroughfare. Move it." Jax turned, a sneer twisting his face. "Just having a conversation, boss. Telling the kid here about the Dewey Decimal System." "Have it somewhere else," Miller said, his tone unwavering, his eyes locked on Jax. "The library is for everyone. Now." There was a tense, silent pause. The entire library held its breath, waiting for the explosion. Jax looked over at Cyrus, who was sitting at a nearby table, pretending to read a magazine. Cyrus gave a tiny, almost invisible nod. Jax grunted in frustration and moved aside. It was a small victory, but in here, small victories are all you get. After that, Miller made a point of spending more time near the library on his rounds. He'd stand in the doorway for 10 minutes at a time, his gaze sweeping the room. His presence was a shield, an unspoken declaration that this small space was under official protection. Cyrus didn't like this one bit. He saw Miller as an obstacle, an intrusion into his domain, and he saw me as the reason for that obstacle. In his world, nothing was impersonal, everything was a power play. He figured Miller was protecting me specifically, perhaps because I was feeding him information. The provocations shifted. They became about testing Miller. Cyrus's men would commit minor, flagrant infractions right in Miller's line of sight, smoking in a non-smoking area, attempting to cut the chow line, trying to get a rise out of him, to make him overstep or lose his temper. But Miller was disciplined. He wrote them up, gave direct orders, and never, ever lost his cool. His quiet, unshakable professionalism seemed to infuriate Cyrus even more. It was a challenge he couldn't meet with his usual tools of fear and violence. The situation was a powder keg, and I was sitting right on top of it, the unwilling fuse. The day it all blew up started like any other. The morning count, the tasteless breakfast, the quiet hum of the library. But in the afternoon, during the shift change, a different CO was on duty for our block, a hard-ass veteran named Riggs, a man who seemed to hate inmates on a cellular level and believed decency was a weakness. That's when Cyrus made his move. The shark sensed the change in the water, the absence of the one man who stood in his way. He walked into the library, alone. That was somehow way more unnerving than when he brought his crew. He moved with a ghostly silence, and I didn't even notice him until he was standing at my desk, his shadow falling over the book I was mending. "Leo," he said softly, the silkiness back in his voice. "We need to have a little chat about your friend in blue." "He's not my friend," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "He's a guard." "Is that so?" Cyrus leaned against the desk, his body completely invading my space. "Because he seems awfully interested in your well-being. Makes a man wonder what you've got to offer him. What kind of special services you're providing the lawman." The insinuation was vile and clear. I said nothing, my eyes fixed on the spine of a book, pretending to read the same title over and over again, the words blurring into meaningless shapes. "See, here's the thing," he continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that made the hairs on my arm stand up. "Order is important. We've got our order in here, and the COs have theirs. It's a balance, a delicate ecosystem. When those lines get blurry, things get messy. And your boy Miller, he's making things messy." He paused, letting the threat hang in the air like toxic smoke. "I need to send a message. A reminder to everyone, guards and inmates alike, about how things really work around here. And you, my friend, are going to help me." "I'm not helping you do anything," I said, the words feeling both brave and incredibly foolish at the same time. Cyrus laughed, a low, humorless sound that held no mirth. "Oh, you are. You see, a shakedown is coming. Any minute now. And I have something in my pocket I shouldn't." He patted his jumpsuit pocket. "It's a little gift from the outside. And in about 5 minutes, when old Riggs comes storming through on his little power trip, he's not going to find it on me. He's going to find it tucked neatly inside this little drawer of yours." My blood ran cold. He was going to plant contraband on me. A baggie of drugs, a shiv, it didn't matter. I'd be sent to the SHU, the secure housing unit, the whole, for months. I'd lose my library job, get my sentence extended, and be marked as someone who got caught. Cyrus would win. My quiet life, my entire strategy for survival, would be torched. My mind raced, a frantic scramble for an exit, a move, anything. Then, the library door swung open. But it wasn't Riggs. It was Officer Miller. He must have been doing one last check before his shift officially ended. His eyes locked onto Cyrus, standing way too close to my desk, his posture predatory and domineering. "Everything all right in here, Leo?" Miller asked, his training kicking in, his voice calm as he sensed the abnormal tension in the room. Cyrus straightened up, his smirk faltering for just a fraction of a second. "Just discussing literature," he said smoothly. Leo was recommending a good book. But I had made my decision. 3 weeks of harassment, of watching my sanctuary be desecrated, of living in constant low-grade fear, had finally pushed me past my breaking point. The ghost was about to scream. I looked past Cyrus, directly into Officer Miller's steady gaze. Then I turned my eyes back to Cyrus. "He was just telling me about his business, officer," I said, my voice coming out clearer and steadier than I could have ever hoped. "About how he has to send a message to keep order." Cyrus's face darkened. This wasn't part of his plan. I had deviated from the script he had written for me. I pressed on, fueled by a surge of pure, desperate adrenaline. He was also explaining how he takes care of his own. Like that kid, Marco. The one who got a hot water burn in the laundry last week after he lost a bet to one of his guys. Cyrus said it was important to make an example of him. This was a bluff, a dangerous piece of gossip I'd overheard. But the slight widening of Cyrus's eyes, the barest flinch, told me it had hit home. I wasn't finished. I was burning my own life down, so I might as well take him with me. And he was telling me how smart it is to have friends on the outside. Like that new CO on the night shift whose cousin worked at the same warehouse as him. The one who never seems to find anything during pat-downs, even when he's bringing in the special coffee for Cyrus's crew. I had answered back. I had taken his secrets, his whispers of power, and thrown them in his face in front of the one person he couldn't intimidate. Silence. A thick, heavy silence filled the room, swallowing all sound. Cyrus stared at me, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Miller stood frozen by the door, his mind clearly struggling to process what was happening. In 30 seconds, I had just declared a war I had no army to fight. Cyrus recovered first. His expression shifted with terrifying speed from incandescent rage to cold, calculating malice. He knew he couldn't touch me. Not now, not in front of a CO who had just heard a litany of accusations. So he did the next best thing. He looked at Miller, clutched his own stomach, and let out a pained grunt. He threatened me, Cyrus gasped, his voice suddenly weak and full of manufactured fear. Said if I didn't back off, his boy Miller would take care of me. Said you were his protection, his muscle on the inside. Then, in a move of pure, vicious genius, he took a half-step and threw himself backward, crashing into a tall metal bookshelf with a sickening thud. Books rained down on top of him in an avalanche of paper and dust. He pushed me, Cyrus yelled, clutching his shoulder and wincing in fabricated pain. The officer pushed me. As if on cue, Jax and Rocco, who had been waiting in the hallway, rushed in. We saw it. The CO pushed him, Jax shouted, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Miller. He shoved him right into the shelf. Unprovoked. It was a setup. Brilliant. Vicious. He'd turned my defiance on its head, twisting my words into an assault charge against a clean officer. In trying to save myself, I had just handed Cyrus the weapon he needed to destroy an innocent man's life. Miller stood there, stunned, his face a mixture of shock and disbelief. It was his word against 3 inmates, one of whom was a powerful shot-caller now claiming to be a victim. Riggs finally arrived, drawn by the commotion. He saw Miller standing over Cyrus, who was groaning dramatically on the floor amidst a pile of books, and his face hardened into a mask of vindictive satisfaction. "What did you do, Miller?" he barked, his hand already on his radio. "I didn't do anything," Miller said, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and futility. "It was a setup. Leo, tell him." But before I could speak, Riggs sneered, "Save it for the Warden," and his voice crackled over the radio, calling for a supervisor to report an officer-on-inmate assault. They put Miller on administrative leave immediately. As 2 ranking officers escorted him out of the block, his eyes met mine. They were filled with confusion, betrayal, and a question I couldn't answer. I was cuffed and taken to the hole, solitary confinement, for my own protection. The heavy steel door slammed shut, plunging me into a world of concrete and silence. 2 days later, a guard came for me. The long, silent walk through the echoing corridors ended at a familiar oak door. The king was waiting to see me again. Back in Warden Thorne's office, the air conditioner hummed its monotonous, indifferent tune. He had been waiting for the simple answer he wanted, a clean story he could file away, but there wasn't one. It was clear Thorne wasn't interested in justice for Miller. He was interested in order. An inmate accusing a guard of assault, especially a shot-caller like Cyrus, was a political and administrative nightmare, and Thorne liked to clean up his messes quickly and quietly. "Let me lay out the situation for you, Leo," Thorne said, steepling his long fingers on his pristine desk. "Right now, I have 3 inmate witnesses, Cyrus, Rocco, and Jax, who have all signed sworn statements that they saw Officer Miller assault Cyrus. Miller has a clean record and a claim he was set up. The Corrections Officers Union is screaming bloody murder. The Internal Affairs investigation is a circus. It's a mess. And you, the quiet librarian, are right in the middle of it." He leaned back, the chair groaning again. "I don't believe for a second that Miller shoved a shot-caller in the middle of the library. It's not his profile. It doesn't track. But the word of a CO versus 3 inmates. Arbitration can go either way. And Cyrus is smart enough to make his story sound convincing. However, he paused, his gaze intensifying, if a fourth inmate, one with no stake in Cyrus's games, an inmate who was the target of the initial intimidation, were to provide a detailed, corroborating account of how the event was staged, well, that would change things dramatically. There it was. The offer, laid out like a slab of meat. He wanted me to be his star witness. He wanted me to snitch. In the unforgiving ecosystem of prison, being a known informant, a rat, is a death sentence. There's no coming back from it. Thorne knew this as well as I did. And what happens to me after I testify? I asked, my voice hoarse from disuse. After I put my name on that piece of paper and stand up in a hearing? Cyrus will have me killed. Thorne gave a slight, almost imperceptible shrug. I can't put you in protective custody forever. It's a prison within a prison. You give me what I need, and I'll see to it that your remaining time is manageable. I'll bury you in a quiet corner of the system. You refuse. Miller's career is over, Cyrus gets away with it, and I will make it my personal mission to ensure every single day of your remaining 2 years feels like a week in the hole. He held all the cards. I could feel the walls of the office closing in. But as I looked at him, I saw a flicker of something in his icy eyes. It wasn't compassion. It was desperation. He needed me. This wasn't just about clearing Miller's name. It was about the fact that Cyrus was getting too powerful, too bold. He had challenged the authority of the institution itself. Thorne needed to put him back in his box, and I was the only tool he had to do it. But I wasn't going to sign my own death warrant just to solve his political problem. I won't testify, I said. Thorne's expression hardened. Poor choice, inmate. I'm not finished, I said quickly, my mind racing, a desperate plan beginning to form. My testimony is worthless in the long run. Cyrus will paint me as a liar, a spurned recruit, or your puppet. He'll have his crew spread rumors. It won't stick, and I'll be a dead man walking. You don't just want to clear Miller. You want to break Cyrus. You want to end him. To do that, you have to destroy his reputation, not with the guards, but with the inmates. Thorne listened, his head tilted slightly, his icy gaze never leaving my face. He was intrigued. He was a man who appreciated strategy, even from an unexpected source. He just had one question. How? This was my only shot. My one move on the entire board. I need out of the hole. Effective immediately. I need my job back in the library. No one can know we had this talk. I need to walk out of this office and back to general population, looking like I'm still on Cyrus's bad side, like you threatened me and I didn't cooperate. And then what? Thorne pressed, a hint of skeptical curiosity in his voice. You'll write him a strongly worded letter? Something like that, I said. Cyrus's power comes from fear and the belief that he's untouchable, that he's loyal to his own. But he's got secrets. He's skimming from his own crew's gambling revenue. He's using inside information from a crooked guard to take out rivals, making them look like snitches so he can absorb their territory. He's not a loyal leader, he's just a snake eating its own tail. I'd spent 3 years in that library, not just reading books, but reading people. Listening to the hushed conversations, the boasts, the grievances. I'd been building a map of the prison's secret political landscape without even realizing it. I can get proof, I continued, my confidence growing. Not proof for your world of hearings and lawyers, but proof for ours. Proof that will resonate in the yard and the chow hall. I'm going to expose him. Not as an informant to the COs, but as a rat and a liability to the entire inmate population. Thorne was silent for a full, long minute. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. My plan was unorthodox and incredibly risky, but it had one major advantage for him. It didn't require him to get his hands dirty. If it worked, Cyrus would be neutralized from the inside out by his own people. If it failed, I was the one who'd pay the ultimate price. Plausible deniability. You have 2 weeks, he said finally, his voice flat. For 2 weeks, you have my invisible protection, though you won't know it. Any overt move Cyrus makes against you will be intercepted. After that, the internal investigation into the Miller incident concludes. I need a result. If not, our deal is off, and you're on your own. One more thing, I said, pressing my advantage. I need access to the interlibrary loan requests from the last 6 months. All of them. And the mailroom work records for the same period. He raised a single eyebrow but nodded. Done. I'll have them delivered to the library in a sealed records box. For your eyes only. Now get out of my office. The walk back to my cell block felt different. The air was still thick with danger, but now it was charged with purpose. I was no longer a ghost or a victim. I was a player in the game. It was a game with deadly stakes, but for the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I had a chance to control my own fate, and my plan was to use the library, the very place Cyrus had marked as my weakness, as my weapon. I was going to write a different kind of kite, the prison term for a hidden note. It wouldn't be a secret message for one person. It would be a newsletter. A chronicle of corruption, printed for the masses. Anonymous, of course. Back in the library the next day, feeling the suspicious eyes of every inmate on me, I began to gather my intel. Thorne was true to his word. A heavy box of records was waiting for me. I traded my future commissary coffee rations with an orderly in the infirmary for tidbits of information about accidents. I cross-referenced the mailroom roster Thorne gave me and found the name of the CO I'd bluffed about, matching his shifts with packages that arrived for Cyrus's crew. Then I dove into the library loan records. And there it was. A pattern, clear as day. Associates of a rival shot-caller named Rico, who ran C-Block, kept checking out specific, obscure law books. Marbury versus Madison. Gideon versus Wainwright. Shortly after a request was logged, the man who checked out the book would end up in solitary, busted for contraband or a trumped-up infraction. Cyrus was using the library's own records as a hit list, a signal to his pet guard to frame members of Rico's crew, making it look like they were studying law to prepare to snitch. This was the key. I began to write. I stayed up all night in my cell, a tiny pencil stub clutched in my hand, a roll of toilet paper as my scroll. I didn't use names, just descriptions that everyone would understand. The shark in A block. The man who smiles. I wrote about the hot water burn on the kid who'd lost a bet. I wrote about the crooked CO who brought in special coffee. Most importantly, I laid out the pattern of the law books, showing with dates and details how the shark was setting up rivals to look like rats. I made 20 copies, my fingers cramping, my heart pounding with every footstep I heard in the hallway. Next came distribution, the most dangerous part. The next day in the library, with Pops acting as a lookout and creating a small diversion by arguing loudly with another inmate about a crossword puzzle, I slipped my newsletters into the pages of the most popular books, Louis L'Amour westerns, John Grisham thrillers, contraband magazines smuggled between hardcovers. I made sure to slip them into the book cart that was headed for other cell blocks, especially Rico's territory in C block. The first day, nothing. Just the usual tension. The second, I could feel a change in the air, a subtle shift in the prison's magnetic field. Inmates were talking in hushed tones, glancing at each other with newfound suspicion. In the yard, I saw one of Rico's top men, a hulking man named Diablo, reading a crumpled piece of paper, his face grim. The poison was spreading. Cyrus felt it, too. He grew paranoid, his eyes darting everywhere. He and his crew started shaking down inmates they suspected, which only made him look weak and desperate, fanning the flames of the rumor mill he could no longer control. The climax came a week after the first newsletter went out. Rico, a big, imposing man with a reputation for brutal pragmatism, walked into the library. He didn't have his crew with him. He didn't need them. He walked straight to where Cyrus was holding court with Jax and Rocco. "Cyrus," Rico said, his voice dangerously calm. "We need to talk." Cyrus stood, trying to project an aura of control he no longer had. "We're talking." Rico held up a crumpled piece of my newsletter. "Been reading some interesting fiction lately. A story about a shark who eats his own. A story about a man who sets up rivals to look like rats just to take a piece of their action." He paused. "It's a good story. Very detailed." Cyrus paled slightly. "That's trash. Someone's trying to start a war between us." "It's already started," Rico said, taking a step closer. "2 of my best men are in the hole because you whispered in a guard's ear. Diablo checked out Marbury versus Madison on Tuesday. He was in the hole on Wednesday. I didn't believe it at first. But the story, it adds up. The law books. The timing. The new CO. You're getting sloppy, Cyrus. Cyrus's crew, Rocco and Jax, looked uncertainly between the two men. Their loyalty was to power and the perception of power. For the first time, Cyrus's was looking fragile. This is a lie. Cyrus spat, his composure finally cracking. He frantically looked around for someone to blame, and his eyes landed on me, standing by my desk, trying to blend in with the shelves. He pointed a shaking finger. It's him. The librarian. He's the one spreading lies. He's the warden's new pet. Thorn must have promised him a deal. It was a fatal mistake. By blaming me, the quiet, insignificant librarian, he seemed weak, pathetic. By accusing me of working with the warden, he inadvertently admitted there was a power at play he couldn't control, confirming to everyone that a deal with the administration was possible, making him look like the one who was cornered. Rico just laughed. A cold, hard, dismissive laugh that echoed in the silent library. The librarian? You're blaming the librarian? You've lost it, Cyrus. You're not a leader. You're just another rat in a cage, squealing when you get cornered. Rico didn't throw a punch. He didn't have to. He turned and walked away. The damage was done. In the inmate world, reputation is everything. Cyrus's had just been publicly and irrevocably shredded. The fallout was swift and silent. Cyrus's empire crumbled not with a bang, but with a whisper. His crew, sensing his weakness and now seeing him as a liability, deserted him. The men who once feared him now openly mocked him. One evening in the chow hall, someone accidentally tripped him, sending his tray of food clattering across the floor. No one helped him up. Men just stared, or worse, laughed. His protection rackets dried up. His contraband supply was cut off. The ultimate punishment wasn't a shiv in the back. It was being made irrelevant, a ghost in the machine he once ran. Once Cyrus's credibility was shot, his witnesses against Officer Miller suddenly remembered a different version of events. Their stories changed, filled with holes and contradictions. The investigation was quietly closed. Officer Miller was cleared of all charges and returned to duty. The first time I saw him back on the block, he was standing by the library door during his rounds. He didn't say anything. He just nodded at me, a silent, complex acknowledgement in his eyes. It was enough. A week later, I was summoned to the warden's office again. The oak desk was just as polished, the air just as cold. Officer Miller has been cleared, Thorn stated, without any preamble. The disruption in A block has subsided. You held up your end of the bargain. He opened a drawer and pulled out a transfer form. You have 2 years left on your sentence. There's a facility upstate. Minimum security, more programs, a world away from here. The transfer is effective tomorrow at 0600. It wasn't a reward, it was him tying up a loose end, removing a piece from the board that knew too much. But it was also a lifeline. A chance to serve the rest of my time in a place where I wasn't a marked man, where the name Cyrus meant nothing. Thank you, I said. As I stood to leave, Thorn spoke one last time, a flicker of something almost like respect in his icy gaze. You took a big risk, Leo. A very messy, dangerous game you played. It's a messy, dangerous place, I replied, turning at the door. He almost smiled. That it is. Don't come back. The next day, on the bus, I watched the gray, imposing walls of Northwood Correctional disappear in the rearview mirror. I didn't feel like a hero. I had simply survived. I hadn't overpowered my enemy. I had dismantled him, piece by piece. I fought back not with violence, but with the one thing they couldn't take from me, my mind. It wasn't about being forgiven or getting out early. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself that the prison had tried to grind away, my agency. In a world designed to break you, to make you a passive number, I had refused to shatter. I had found my own kind of justice, my own kind of freedom. And in a place like that, sometimes it's the only kind that matters.